We are coming up on the beginning of fall migration in the Northern Hemisphere. So, how do birds move around? What are the different patterns of migration? So glad you asked. Hello everyone, I'm Aaron, a birding naturalist. Let's talk about migration strategies. Migration strategies, migration in general. So, it's an amazing topic. Let's lay out some definitions and sort of bounds on this conversation. One is, for the purposes of this conversation, this video, and my expertise, we're going to be talking about bird migration. Many animals migrate. There are lots of different forms of migration. I'm really focusing on bird migration. So sometimes I'll say bird migration, but if I slip up and you see me just say migration, I mean bird migration. So what do we even mean by migration? Is it just movement of animals? Not quite. Migration is the seasonal, sort of reproducible, reversible movement of birds. So when a young bird fledges out of its nest and gains independence and leaves its parents and goes and finds a new nesting habitat, that's not migration, because that's not going to be coming back. That bird isn't returning and reversing that movement. That's a one-way trip. Hopefully it's going to find a place, find a mate, establish new territory. It's done. And if an entire species has only those kinds of movements, they're called dispersal, where young birds leave the nest, disperse to new habitats, new areas, and then just stay there, that species as a whole would not be a migratory species. Migrations are repeatable and reversible. So these are when birds leave us a northern breeding ground, travel someplace, spend the winter there, and then go back to their northern breeding ground and do that each year. It's repeatable and it's reversible, right? One direction and then the other direction. That's migration. But as is so true of nature in so many different ways, it's never just that simple, because within that repeatable, reversible movement definition, birds do all sorts of different things. There are all sorts of different patterns and combinations of movements. Some birds do it sort of a complete migration, where you have a breeding population and all the individuals leave that breeding area and they go to a wintering area, a different geographic area, spend the winter there, and then all the individuals leave that wintering area and go back to the breeding area. So you have parts of the year where that bird is completely absent from one part of its range or the other. But there are lots of other patterns. There are partial migrations where some birds leave and some birds stay. There are different sort of combinations that those birds can move through and over different landscapes. So for example, one important definition is direction, the orientation of a migration. Far and away, the most common direction that birds migrate is across latitudes, latitudinal migration. So this is north to south, south to north. They go north and south. On a normal sort of oriented map of the world, they go up and down. This is in response to changing daylights, temperatures. There are lots of different signals that cue birds to migrate. But in terms of birds, latitudinal migration is the most common. There's another kind of movement that is altitudinal, which is also not wildly unheard of. And this is where birds don't migrate north, south, east, west. They migrate up, down. In the warmer months of the year, they migrate upslope, up higher into mountain ranges. And then when it gets colder, maybe it starts snowing on tops of those mountains, they move downslope. So it has nothing to do with cardinal directions and everything to do with altitude, up and down. And then in terms of birds, at least, the sort of least commonly observed form is longitudinal migration, so east to west. Many seabirds do this. There are some examples of land birds that are doing this, but it's definitely not as common as altitudinal, and definitely not nearly as common as latitudinal migration. But there's even more nuance beyond that, because when a bird, let's talk about latitudinal migration, north to south, the most common example. When birds leave their northern breeding grounds, say, let's talk about a northern hemisphere bird leaving its northern breeding grounds in the northern hemisphere winter, right? All of this is totally reversible for the southern hemisphere birds in their southern breeding grounds farther to the south that then move north during the southern hemisphere winter towards the equator. But for now, let's talk about northern hemisphere. You've got a bird, a population of birds spread across some geographic range in the northern part of North America, say. You can imagine that there may be 3 populations, and we're going to call this one A, and this one B, and this one C. Now, sometimes one of the patterns of migrations are called chain migrants, where these 3 populations migrate from the north down south. It's kind of like each link in the chain is maintained. The northern population, A, in the breeding grounds, ends up the northern population, you're still A, in the wintering grounds. So the orientation of these 3 populations remain the same. A to the north, B in the middle, C to the south in their breeding range. A in the north, B in the middle, C in the south in their wintering range. But that's not always the case. Sometimes you can have birds with populations A, B, and C that do something more like that. A leapfrog migration is what this is called, because you've got A leapfrogging over B and C, B leapfrogging over C, and so the orientation of these populations reverses. You have A in the north in the breeding grounds, B in the middle, and C in the south. But then in the wintering grounds, C ends up the northernmost population, B in the middle, and A is the farthest south. They've traveled the longest distance. So one of the examples of this is actually where it's A, B, and C again, and C actually ends up not moving at all. C might be a resident population. So you've got B and A populations kind of moving through or around C, but C just stays still. That's a great example of a partial migrant, because some of the populations of this species are migratory and some aren't. A great example of this is red tails in Central California. There are definitely red tails in Central California that are just residents. They stay here all year long. But there are other birds that move around. Red-tailed hawks still come from the north, and move through Central California to the south as they move past this resident population. Red tails are another example of where it gets even more complicated, because there are also some birds from the north that come to Central California to winter. And so they're not going through, they're just staying here. So it gets more complicated. Another factor to think about, and another way that people think about divvying up migrants, are the distances that they move. And a great example of this is those sort of leapfrog migrants, because you've got some birds that don't migrate at all, or maybe are very short distance migrants, some birds that are sort of medium distance migrants, and some birds that are much longer distance migrants. Now, that's an example of different migratory distances occurring within a species. There are also different species that genuinely migrate different distances. So there are short distance migrants where the entire population does migrate, but not very far. And there are medium distance migratory species where the entire population migrates and it's a little bit farther. And there are absolutely long distance migratory species where all the individuals of a species migrate, and they migrate crazy long distances. There are some shorebirds, Arctic terns, that migrate incredible distances, doing incredible feats flying over open oceans for days at a time, covering hundreds, sometimes even thousands of miles without stopping on these wild flights to get them from farther northern areas to very distant southern parts of the globe. Really, really amazing super athlete birds. Now, one thing you might be thinking about is, where do you draw the line? Where does a short distance migrant become a medium distance migrant? Where does a leapfrog migrant become a chain migrant? Is there some blurring of the lines? Yes, there's blurring of all of these lines. Migration is often thought of as sort of generalities, but there's always nuance, there's always areas of gray in between these different categories. Nature works on a spectrum in all of these formats, and we humans like to block things into different chunks and different boxes. It works in some ways to sort of get an idea of different patterns, but it's always good to remember that there, in between all those boxes, there are lots of examples that you can find that sort of bridge the gaps and blur the lines. So why do birds migrate anyway? You know, there are all these different movement patterns. There's leapfrog migrations, there are chain migrations, there are short and medium and long distance migrants. Why are they doing this? Why do these birds move? And it's because of resources and climate. Birds that are, for example, in the far north, may be great in the summertime, in the northern summer. But when that northern winter comes, it's going to get much colder. A lot of their food resources may disappear. The temperature may drop to the point where it's just not habitable anymore. And so leaving that area to find areas where there is food and where the temperatures are warmer may yield really important survival benefits. Those really long distance migrants have it to the point where they leave the northern hemisphere summer during sort of the northern hemisphere fall, but then cross the equator and end up in the southern hemisphere just as the southern hemisphere spring is arising. And so they experience a southern hemisphere summer. And then when the southern hemisphere fall is coming, they leave again, chasing the northern hemisphere summer. So they basically never see winter. They jump from summer in one hemisphere to summer in the other, and then back again over and over and over again, just avoiding winter all the time. It's a really good strategy if you don't like winter. And so it's these kinds of drivers, the need to find warmer environments, the need to find places with food, that are the major drivers of why birds migrate, sometimes these crazy long distances. Bird migration is one of these incredible spectacles that you can see around the world. It is always awe-inspiring to see these happen, to be able to go to a hilltop and witness streams of birds flying through, or to listen in the dark of night and hear birds flying over you in the darkness as they migrate from one part of their life cycle to the next stage. It is awe-inspiring. It's incredible to learn about. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing to experience. And I hope that you take this opportunity to go out this fall and experience it. There are tons of places to go and see migrants of a variety of different species of birds. And I really strongly encourage you to go and have a migratory experience yourself at some point. I hope that this video shared a little bit about the complexity and wonder of migration and all the different strategies that birds use and the different movement patterns that we can find in nature. There are always more patterns to be found, and I'm sure that these definitions will broaden and split and become more nuanced as time goes on. Always a really fun thing to watch evolve. Thank you very much for the view. I hope you do go out and enjoy some migration this fall. Subscribe to the channel, and until next time, enjoy the natural world.